The tranquility of the night shift was something I had come to appreciate. The quiet corridors, the soft hum of the medical equipment, and the routine checks. Everything was predictable. Or so I thought. It was around 2:30 a.m., and the nurse's station was abuzz with soft chatter when the overhead system blared, "Code Blue, Room 104." A code blue meant a patient was in dire need of resuscitation. The team and I rushed, pushing our emergency cart, anticipating a fight to save a life. But here's the thing about Room 104. The patient, Mr. Daniels, had passed away earlier that evening. I knew it because I was there when we declared him dead, his long battle with an aggressive form of cancer having come to an end. We approached the room, hesitation evident in our steps. The room's light was off, and the familiar sound of the heart monitor emitted a steady tone, signaling that everything was normal. But how could it be? We slowly entered, half expecting some cruel prank or perhaps a technical malfunction. In the dim illumination from the hallway lights, we saw him. Mr. Daniels, sitting upright on his bed, staring straight at us. His face, which hours before had been pale and lifeless, was now animated by an unsettling grin. His eyes, previously closed in eternal rest, stared vacantly at us. We froze. This was impossible. The figure beckoned with a crooked finger, the heart monitors beeping, increasing in pace, mirroring our rising heartbeats. Nurse Jenkins, always the brave one, stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Mr. Daniels? How?" But before she could finish her sentence, the overhead lights flickered on, revealing an empty bed. The heart monitor flatlined, announcing the undeniable truth we already knew. Mr. Daniels was indeed dead. We stood there, trying to process the eerie and inexplicable event. The tension in the room was palpable. Nurse Jenkins, visibly shaken, went to the intercom system by the door. "Who called the code blue for Room 104? The reply came quickly, a mixture of confusion and concern. No one did. The system didn't register any code blue alert. We looked at each other, our faces a canvas of terror and disbelief. Could it have been a collective hallucination? It seemed unlikely. I decided to review the CCTV footage, hoping for some form of clarity. As the others returned to their duties, I rewound the footage to the exact moment the code blue was called. The corridor outside Room 104 was empty, but what sent chills down my spine was the brief glitch in the footage when the door to Room 104 appeared to open slightly and then shut on its own, right before the announcement. I needed answers. Digging into Mr. Daniels' medical records, I stumbled upon an old note from his early days at the hospital. It mentioned his reported visions and encounters with a shadowy figure during his hospital stays. The note was mostly dismissed, attributing his claims to the strong medications he was on. As dawn approached, I sat, weary and drained, trying to piece together the bizarre puzzle. That's when a soft, chilling whisper floated in the air. "Thank you." Startled, I looked around. The corridors were empty, the nurse's station deserted. The whisper, I realized, wasn't meant to scare but was an acknowledgement, a message from beyond. The next night before my shift, I visited Room 104. With a heavy heart, I spoke softly. "Mr. Daniels, if that was you, I hope you found your peace." A cold breeze brushed past, and for a moment, the room felt eerily warm. The heart monitor, which had been switched off since his passing, blinked once, as if in response. From that night on, Room 104 was permanently locked. Staff reported hearing soft conversations and occasionally the sound of a heart monitor beeping. But no one dared to enter. Out of respect or fear, I couldn't tell. While the horror of that night never truly faded, it served as a chilling reminder of the thin line between our realm and the next. Some tales were better left untold, and some rooms better left unopened. Yet, in the silent hallways of the hospital during the night shift, one could sometimes feel an unseen presence, a guardian of sorts, watching over, reminding us of the mysteries that lay just beyond our understanding. The ER in the hospital where I worked had its share of strange tales, but none quite like the incident of room 3 on a fog-laden night. It started like any other procedure, with me assisting Dr. Miller in a crucial surgery. As we worked on the patient, a lull in our conversation was pierced by Dr. Miller's request. "Hemostat," he said, extending his hand without looking up. I swiftly handed it over. The surgery continued, the rhythmic sounds of breathing and beeping machines enveloping us. About 5 minutes passed, then Dr. Miller's voice cut through again. "Hemostat." Confused, I looked around. The tool was already in his hand. Maybe he needed another. I handed him a second one. But a short while later, he asked again. "Hemostat." My heart rate quickened. The process was looping. Every 5 minutes, like clockwork, he'd request the same tool. But each time, it was already right there, clamped and working on the patient. Panic gripped me with every repeated request. The once familiar surroundings of the operating room became increasingly alien, the bright lights overhead turning oppressively glaring. Each iteration made the air seem thicker, harder to breathe. Was this some twisted nightmare? After what felt like hours, I couldn't bear it any longer. Dropping the instrument tray with a clatter, I ran from the room, ignoring the startled calls of the other staff. I fled the hospital, drove home, and collapsed into bed, the haunting echo of hemostat ringing in my ears. The morning sun seemed incongruous with the night's events. As I walked back into the hospital, nurses whispered and stared. They weren't just whispers of concern, there was judgment in their eyes. The head nurse approached, her expression stern. "Care to explain last night?" I recounted the surreal loop, the unending requests, expecting understanding or at least shared confusion. But the reaction I got was far from what I anticipated. "Dr. Miller asked for the hemostat once," she replied, her voice dripping with disbelief. "Just once. You handed it over and then, minutes later, you ran out without a word." I tried to argue, to explain the endless repetition I experienced, but the incredulous looks from everyone around made it clear. In their reality, the loop never happened. To this day, I don't know what occurred in that operating room. All I have is the unshakable memory of those repeated moments and the chilling feeling that, in some parallel existence, they might still be ongoing. Every time I pass room 3, I can't help but wonder if, on some unseen level, Dr. Miller is still asking for the hemostat. I'd heard rumors about the night shift at a hospital where I worked. Whispers in the locker rooms, hushed conversations in the corridors, everyone talking about the strange occurrences on the 5th floor. But when my superior scheduled me for the night shift, I was both nervous and curious. The 5th floor was normally off-limits to staff after dark, but with recent renovations, there was no avoiding it. The hospital was running out of space, and we needed to utilize every ward we could. The night began uneventfully. My rounds took me through the usual hallways and rooms, the soft hum of medical machines creating a consistent background noise. As I approached the elevator to make my way to the 5th floor, I couldn't help but think of the warnings. "Stay away from the 5th floor," they'd said. "It's not the same after dark." I dismissed these tales as pure superstition, remnants of stories told by older nurses to spook the newcomers. I hit the elevator button, and the doors slid open, revealing a dimly lit interior. When I pressed the button for the 5th floor, a subtle, icy chill crept up my spine. Dismissing it as my overactive imagination, I stepped in. The doors opened to a dim hallway. The overhead lights flickered sporadically, casting eerie shadows that danced across the cold, sterile walls. But there was something else, a subtle movement at the far end of the corridor. Squinting, I thought I could make out a silhouette, a figure. It was hard to discern, appearing to be both there and not, as if caught between reality and another world. My rational mind attempted to find explanations. Maybe it was a patient, someone sleepwalking or confused. But the feeling that overcame me was more primitive, an innate sense of dread that told me to turn back. I was about to heed that advice when a soft, childlike giggle echoed through the hallway. I froze. This was a hospital, not a playground. Where was that sound coming from? Gathering my courage, I decided to investigate. I took tentative steps, my nurse's shoes making soft tapping sounds that seemed deafeningly loud. As I neared the end of the corridor, the figure vanished, but the giggling continued, now emanating from one of the rooms. Slowly, I pushed the door open. The room was bathed in an otherworldly glow, a bluish hue that emanated from nowhere in particular. In the center of the room was a small child's tricycle, its wheels still spinning. I approached it, my heart pounding. This was impossible. Children weren't allowed on the 5th floor. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept past me, and the lights flickered more aggressively. The room darkened, and the tricycle abruptly stopped spinning. My heart raced as I turned to leave, but as I did, the door slammed shut. Panic surged as I fumbled with the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Whispers began to fill the room, growing in volume and intensity. They spoke of pain, suffering, and cries for help. They seemed to come from every direction, closing in on me. I backed into a corner, eyes darting, searching for an exit, a reprieve, anything. And then, just as suddenly as it began, silence fell. The door creaked open an inch, inviting me to leave. But I was paralyzed, unable to comprehend what I'd just experienced. Taking a deep breath, I mustered the courage to step out. The hallway was now bathed in a harsh white light. Everything was back to normal, as if the eerie episode had been a figment of my imagination. As I briskly made my way to the elevator, a voice called out, "Leaving so soon?" I turned to see an older nurse, her face etched with wrinkles and concern. "You shouldn't have gone to the 5th floor," she whispered. I thought it was just a story," I stammered. She shook her head slowly. "It's a memory, a residue of past events. That floor has witnessed many tragedies, and they refuse to be forgotten. Consider yourself lucky to have made it out. Not everyone does." I didn't need any more convincing. As soon as my shift ended, I put in a transfer request. The hospital might be a place of healing, but the 5th floor, it had a different story to tell. One I never wanted to hear again.